Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched, where this week I watched 86, or the first 8 episodes, from 2021. Now, I don't think I've actually done an episode on this show of a full-length anime series, but I have previously done episodes on full TV series and anime movies, specifically the Gundam movies adapted from the original series. For those who are longtime viewers of this show or of my content in general, you'll be familiar with, at least a little bit familiar with my media preferences and my interest in things surrounding mecha and adjacent things, my interest in anime content, and my interest in anything that has a good head on its shoulders and wants to have a bit of a thoughtful social commentary attached to it. And so I actually got recommended this series kind of out of the blue. It's been some time. I don't watch a lot of anime anymore. I used to watch quite a lot. And it's been some years since I've been sort of watching a lot of anime, and I wanted to get back in. And I had this recommended by a friend kind of out of the blue, and got to watching it. Now, as you'll note, this is only for the first 8 episodes, but I feel like there is so much to unpack just in the first 8 episodes of this series. It basically is a season on its own that I wanted to take the time to talk about it because I think it's really interesting. It's also from 2021, and as far as I know, doesn't have a prospect of a sequel series, which is a shame, and it should, because I think even so far it's very, very good. So unless it takes a turn in the further episodes, it would be a mistake not to continue this on. The series is adapted from, as I understand it, a series of light novels. And I'm under the impression that the full series only covers the first 3 light novels. Up to now, there are 13 of them, I believe. So, for a whole bunch of reasons, that makes them a little bit less likely to... I think there's a manga adaptation as well. Light novels don't tend to do super well in the West. They are a little bit easier to translate. They require a little less work than a manga adaptation. Usually one has more words, but you have to do typesetting. Anyway, my point here being that I think this is a really interesting narrative and one that deserves a full run of its entire series, hopefully. Right off the bat, I think this show leaves you with a really good visual and narrative impression. The first episode is a bit bumpy in terms of just onboarding you because there's a lot for it to throw at you. But under the circumstances, I think it does a pretty good job. And it does, even if you're a little confused, it hooks very well into you wanting to engage with it more and giving you a lot of questions and curiosity for the remainder of the show. The visual styling, I think, is fantastic. This is a combination of 2D and 3D animation. I don't know the details behind the 2D animation, but some of the 3D animation, it's readily apparent that it's 3D. However, I think it's worth noting how well integrated that 3D animation is into the 2D animation. One of the more obvious ways you can typically tell, especially in older stuff, where they've done a kind of poor job with the 3D animation, is that the two don't meld together very well, where it almost looks like the 3D is sitting on top of the 2D. And if there's one very strong compliment I can give to the visual stylings of this entire series, it's that the 3D is perfectly integrated. They use this is very reminiscent to me of the type of stuff that was being done in practical effects and camera tricks during sort of the I don't remember the term, but sort of the 50s and 60s in Hollywood, where CGI was not so much a thing, but using clever camera work could get you a long way towards doing really interesting things. And obviously it's apples and oranges, but when the visual on screen makes you believe the fiction, and makes you believe gives you, the best of both worlds of being able to have fantastical and artistically represented drawn stuff, while having the sort of dimensionality and the potential for dynamic animation that's harder to do when it's not in 3D. I think it integrates really, really nicely. In particular, the show uses really good use of lighting and color grading to paint beautiful pictures, beautiful landscapes, all kinds of different kinds of shots, and really use that to good effect to do emotional storytelling as well. You can take random shots from all throughout all of these different episodes, and the color is all over the place in a good way. It uses oranges, blues, reds, greens, all to sort of set emotional undertones, and all these sort of artistic choices that don't, tire your eyes out. I think that's very common in a lot of media, whether anime, movies, whatever, not even getting into the problem with Hollywood and its color grading issues that it's been having for the last 40 years. That kind of thing can be very fatiguing, and it ultimately sort of bores you visually. So seeing a piece of media that uses color to really good effect while also integrating multiple media styles, I think is worthy of note in particular. Stylistically, I don't want to get quite into the plot just yet. We'll get there. The style is really interesting because this is very much a mix of it's a mix of styles, some from sort of futuristic stuff, some from sort of historical militaristic stuff, some crosses between those things, and some that are completely fantastical. And I think that leads to it having a fairly unique visual identifier, visual style, but it also is leaning enough on visual tropes to do some storytelling with its tropes. As I've mentioned before, tropes are not an inherently bad thing, and so using visual storytelling stuff in its designs to say, oh, these are the more formal. This is a more formal group. This is a more militaristic group. These people are better off, worse off, whatever else. All of that design goes into the stylings of each of the characters, their outfits, the areas that they live, the buildings, all these different things. So there's a lot of little design details that go into all of the environments that I think do a lot of fantastic storytelling as well. And when the show itself has so much else to say, it's very nice to have a lot of the sort of narrative baseline being done by visuals rather than having to exposit a lot of details about the universe. That said, it has a little bit of ups and downs in that respect. Like I said, the first episode and a little bit into the second does sort of front load a lot, where you need to just sort of believe whatever's on screen, and not everything is explained, and you're just going to have to sort of flow with it. And I think that's totally fine. But where it really gets into, I think, what's best about it so far, and what I'm most interested in, is the writing and the overarching narrative and the characterization that's done with various characters. I'm not going to there's going to be a point I'll I'll note it when I do, but I'm going to talk more about the plot itself. I'll still try to avoid explicit spoilers, but I'll note when I'm getting there. This show has a lot to say about a whole bunch of social issues, and I think that's what makes it very compelling. I think it would have been very compelling when it came out, and even now, oh God, it's 4 years later. Well, anyway, 4 years after the original anime release, I don't know when the light novel was released. I think the themes are just as pertinent, if not potentially more pertinent than they were at the time, or at least, it's always up to subjective interpretation. I think it is very, very timely as I'm watching it now. This show is heavily militaristic, but it is also very critical of military things. And that's at a very fundamental level. Whereas I've talked about Gundam, and Gundam is often cited as something that is it is military adjacent. Well, it's not even military adjacent. It's very heavily militarized. That is a main theme of all of the elements of the shows I've seen, while also being pretty heavily critical of what militarism and kind of unrestricted war do to people and nations and all different levels. Basically war criticism. But the things that I have watched from Gundam have that a little bit more as subtext. It's not hidden, but it is not necessarily the main focus. Gundam is often about the flash and awe just as much as it is about the social commentary and military criticism. This show, off the bat, shows that it is willing to show you some pretty and visually interesting things, but that is not what it is here for. This is a show about the horrors of war and the suffering of individuals and the suffering of larger groups, and the emotionality that is tied in with that. And while it's hardly unique in being an anime show about militarism and having an emotionally charged tone, I have rarely seen other shows do it with so much finesse. This show rides a really careful line so that it doesn't overly invest you in sort of believing the lie. That is often sort of the case with a lot of other military and mech shows and things like that, that it's not trying to trick you into believing one thing and then pull out the rug from under you, or make you particularly emotionally conflicted between sides or something like that. It is pretty straightforward as to what it wants to say. But at the same time, it doesn't yank at your heartstrings too hard, which I think can be very common in a lot of other media, including a lot of anime, where you may reflect on it later and say, that was a little manipulative. It was doing things explicitly to kind of emotionally hurt me, to get me more engaged in the show. And that's not inherently an evil thing to do as a writer, but this show very much lets you know what it's about to do, and then it does it. And then it hurts. And that's not to say that it isn't hiding anything, but the core emotional beats are telegraphed such that you can't be that surprised, especially when it does certain things repeatedly, because it's trying to drive home certain points, to my view. So I think this rides a very nice line of having a good but fairly simple narrative and using its emotionality to good effect without feeling manipulative or like it's being melodramatic either. If anything, it can be kind of understated. And the emotional reactions of the characters are very natural, believable, and almost kind of extra heartbreaking at times in how natural and believable they are. I think this is in stark contrast to something like, might make some enemies with this one. I think Code Geass is a pretty terrible show. I watched it when it came out many, many years ago, and I watched it again not that long ago. And my opinion has not changed, that is largely a show for tweens and teenagers that is excessively melodramatic and is way too eager to do the thing about do the part where everybody's cool and doing cool stuff, and not, even when it does start to be self-critical, doesn't adequately acknowledge the horrificness of a lot of what's going on in that show. There's a bunch of other references I could make, but I might actually save those for when I do more episodes about this, because unless something happens, I will probably do 1 or 2 more episodes on the remainder of this show. So we'll get there. But at this point, I want to actually say I'm going to start talking about the arc of this, the arc of the show, or the first 8 episodes here. And this is going to be, I'm going to avoid spoilers as much as possible, but if you want the narrative completely unspoiled, and I highly recommend you go into it completely unspoiled, then maybe kind of skip the remainder of this and come back to it. Right off the bat, I'm going to say what happens in the first episode, one of the reveals that happens in the very first episode fairly early, because it is directly reflects on the entire rest of the show, which is revealed in the first episode that the nation that we are, our main character, the nation that our main character is, or ostensibly main character, is part of, which is called San Magnolia, I believe, is fighting a war. And they are claiming that it is being done with drones. And the reality is, it is not. The drones that are out there are manned by people. This, to me, because of the specific media that I have consumed, made me immediately start thinking about Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, a fantastic piece of sci-fi fiction written by a horrible, horrible person. Anyway, this is not a new narrative, and in fact, it's one that's ramped up much more over the last 20 years as drone technology and those sorts of things, and discussions about ethics of their use and those sorts of things have become more widespread. But Ender's Game, which I think came out in the early 80s, was sort of a seminal work in terms of talking about remote war, and also, spoilers for Ender's Game, it's a 40-something-year-old book at this point. The reveal at near the end of Ender's Game, which is not particularly pertinent to the plot, but is it's an emotional beat, is that the fighters that these kids have been driving in their game simulation, their war simulation, are not in fact remote drones at all. They're fleets of humans that were sent there years ago and are finally arriving at the battlefield, and hey kids, time to, sacrifice human life to try and win a war that's got a whole lot of other things going on. So I was started to think about that immediately. As I understand it, this entire series the writer was heavily inspired, among other things, by reading accounts of people who in real world were drone pilots, and accounts of the PTSD that they suffered after doing that job for some amount of time. And that doesn't even get into the sort of the narrative here, which is about real people inside the drones and their literal bodily sacrifice. But I think that's a very interesting place to be writing from if you're thinking about the human cost, literal or figurative, mental or physical, of engaging in war, even if it's remote. And so our main character is in a position of knowing the secret. And we suddenly realize, they don't say it in as many words, but you interpret it. And this is sort of the subtlety of the show. It's not that subtle. It's just not said explicitly that, oh, this is a very well-known secret. There's lots of people who are doing the main character, name's Lena, I think, doing her job. And they all know because they're on a call with the people who are in the drones. They all know. But the what's presented both at the very beginning of the show before this and thereon after is this narrative of propaganda of an entire society that is being fed a narrative about a bloodless war, where their remote drones are protecting them, they're protecting the nation, and there are no casualties. And it's a very nice narrative to hear, but it's not at all reflective of the reality of what's happening. What's kind of even more interesting is that it's also very quickly revealed that the people who are in these drones are basically exiled members of the same nation. And this is actually where I'm gonna bring up one thing that does bother me about the show, although this may change. They explain the narrative that basically 9 years ago, not very long ago, there was this sort of outbreak of war of this other nation who attacked San Magnolia with their own, their own AI drones, and that started sort of a cultural revolution, or that's maybe sanitizing it a bit, in San Magnolia. And the fact that everybody you see in San Magnolia is white with white hair and blue eyes and all this other stuff is not a coincidence. Because everybody else who lived there was exiled. I think they literally call people who are not, I believe the people who are there are called Albans. And then everybody else, I believe, is called Colorado or something like that. It's pretty on the nose that they're like literally colored people. And so that's pretty, especially to an American audience, that's particularly unsubtle. So literally they put up a wall and kicked everybody who wasn't of this one race out, and they made their little insular racist state, and everybody else was pushed outside. And then they decided, hey, since nobody can see outside, we'll just make those people out there fight the war. And that leads to a whole bunch of really interesting narratives throughout the show thus far and further on. What bothers me about it a little bit is only because it was only 9 years ago. And it is, unfortunately, it's becoming more believable in current day and age personal social criticism here, that there is a level to which people are willing to just lie to themselves, or even just hold incredibly horrible beliefs, and insulate themselves from reality. And so, with it only having been 9 years ago, everybody who was alive 9 years ago, which is almost everybody in the show, knows or knew people who used to live there who are not there anymore. And maybe they don't know the full nature of what happened. But if over the course of however much time, probably a fairly limited amount of time, I don't know if it's been explicitly said or ever will be, when a bunch of your neighbors all disappear, and when all of the people who don't look like you disappear, that's, for anybody of, hopefully, there's fiction here, but for anybody of a just mind, that would be disturbing, or it should be. And especially with, well, I don't want to get too much into current political, social commentary, the nature of international relations in our current world right now, but it's alarming to see, and to the point of being borderline unbelievable, that everybody's so willing to go along with this. So I'm very curious for the remainder of the show, how much they're going to reveal about what level of it is just propaganda, and what level of it is actual belief, and what level of it is people are actually this horrible and everybody knows, but everybody's ignoring it because it makes them, live what they think is a better life. So that is that's a main undertone here. And then the other main undertone is about the relationship between, sort of in the more short term, or what more is put directly in your face during the arc of these 8 episodes, is the realities of the particular team that Lena is working with. She's on the side of wanting to acknowledge them as people. And there's a lot of discussion about how they are, for those people who do know about what's actually going on, they say all of this is because everybody who's outside the wall, everybody who's fighting or whatever, they can even tell themselves that it's not a lie because they consider them to be subhuman. So saying there's no human casualties is fine because they believe the people who are out there are not human. And so our point of view character is very much in a position that is not looked upon fondly, where there are other people around her who are willing to acknowledge the nature of what's going on, but not necessarily willing to acknowledge the horribleness of it or the humanity of the 86. That's the people outside, what they're called after they've been removed from the 85 districts. And so there's a lot of sort of interpersonal stuff and trying to understand the relationship between somebody who has good intentions but is part of an oppressive force, and who is trying to understand and genuinely respect the people who really have a lot of reasons not to respect her in return, or to be upset with her, or to hate her, or whatever, while also having to grapple with the very practical effects of the war they're fighting. So it's really very multifaceted in addressing sort of, it's one thing to like emotionally alienate yourself from people. It's another to treat them as being subhuman or expendable or whatever. I'm sort of going in a circle here. There's just so much to unpack, and I am still trying to like not spoil too much so that people can enjoy it if they haven't watched it yet. And so the emotional aspects of the show as it explores the growing relationship between the characters as things progress, as things around them all progress and get socially, and well, they get worse and worse in a variety of ways, is very emotionally engaging, and it's very heart-wrenching at many moments. It's very emotionally overwhelming to the point I think it took me, like, I kind of wanted to power through some of it, but it took me, I think I watched it over like 3 or 4 days to get through the 8 episodes. And now I've taken like, I don't know how much time I've taken now since I've watched those 8, because the end of the 8 episodes is enough to be like, oh God, okay, I need a breather. I need to process all this, and then I need to, I want to talk about it. I don't know that I've done the best job of selling how good this show is and how well balanced it is up to this point. And I think if I went and straight up talked about each episode, I could probably sell it harder. But I also think this is a show that does a brilliant job of needing to reveal things at its own pace. And it's not a show that relies on reveals either. The reason that it has certain reveals are to engage in plot development more so than ever to use them for emotional manipulation, as I've mentioned before. And I think there's a lot that's a whole other topic. I could delve deep into the psychology behind the individuals and sort of the way they've insulated themselves in various ways. And this is on both sides, whether it's the actual fighters themselves who have emotionally insulated themselves from the horrors of what surrounds them, both, directly in the war that they're fighting and also with everything that's going on outside of the wall and with the people they know or used to know. And then the people who are inside, who are willing to lie to themselves in various ways or tell themselves certain stories, or just be okay with the reality of what's going on because they don't have that much of an option to resist it, And I think it'll be very curious. I'm very curious what the remainder of the show will do in terms of showing any actual social resistance, or whether there will even be any. It's clearly not a show that shies away from being dour and painful, and it doesn't lean into tropes like so many other war media of there being some sort of potential for being saved or revolution or whatever else, that it may just progress and get worse and worse. And currently there doesn't look like there's much development of an arc towards things getting better, or there really being revolutionary movement. So I'm very curious from here on out what that's going to end up looking like. Anyway, I think I've rambled on this long enough. I probably have other things to say, but with these, I try not to take too many notes. I think it's very, very good. I think it's produced very well. I think it's written very well. Oh, I don't think I even noted. I'm watching the subtitled version with the Japanese audio. However, there are a lot of elements that are on screen in English. I don't actually know whether they were also in English in the original Japanese release, or whether that's a localization thing that they did. If it is a localization thing, they redid a lot of things in English, which is curious. So yeah, I'd actually like to know that. But I think it's very, very well made. I'm very curious to see the remainder of it. I don't know how long it's going to take me to get through it, but I'll get through it. Anyway, yeah. If you've made it to the end, thank you very much. If you watched the show or the first 8, thank you. Let me know about that in the comments as well. Please, as usual, don't feel like I have to say this, but don't spoil anything because I haven't gotten to the remainder of the show, and I will. Yeah. Let me know your thoughts. I'll see you guys next time.